The handcuffs clicked shut at 6:15 a.m. on September 22, 2025, exactly 21 years after Victoria Tori Blackwood, the 29-year-old investigative television journalist whose groundbreaking exposés had earned her 3 Emmy nominations, vanished from her Boston apartment while working on what she called the story that will end careers. When FBI agents led away 67-year-old Thomas Bradford, the legendary news director who had built Channel 7 into New England's most trusted news source, the collective gasp could be heard from newsrooms across Boston to the boardrooms of major television networks nationwide. Thomas Bradford wasn't just another television executive. He was a broadcasting titan, the man whose news judgment had shaped public discourse for 4 decades, whose mentorship had launched the careers of dozens of nationally recognized journalists, and whose commitment to investigative reporting had earned Channel 7 more Peabody Awards than any other local station in America. He was also the man who had assigned Tori her most dangerous stories, who had spoken passionately at her memorial about the importance of fearless journalism, and who had established the Victoria Blackwood Award for Investigative Excellence in her honor. But as the FBI would reveal in the shocking evidence that followed, Thomas Bradford had been orchestrating the most insidious cover-up in television news history. Victoria Blackwood was everything broadcast journalism represented at its finest in 2004. At 29, she possessed the rare combination of intellectual rigor, on-camera charisma, and moral courage that separated true journalists from mere television personalities. With her striking auburn hair, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of authoritative presence that commanded attention whether she was reporting from a courthouse steps or a corporate boardroom, Tori had become the face of investigative journalism in New England. But Tori was far more than her television presence suggested. She held a master's degree in investigative journalism from Columbia, had worked as a researcher for 60 Minutes before joining Channel 7, and had built a reputation for meticulous fact-checking and fearless pursuit of powerful subjects. Her investigations had exposed corruption in city government, corporate malfeasance, and environmental cover-ups that had resulted in criminal charges and policy changes. What made Tori truly exceptional was her commitment to stories that other journalists avoided. While many reporters focused on sensational crimes or political scandals, Tori investigated systemic problems that affected ordinary people: predatory lending practices, nursing home abuse, and corporate pollution that disproportionately impacted working-class communities. Her success was built on credibility and courage. Tori's investigations consistently led to real-world change. Corrupt officials resigned, dangerous products were recalled, and vulnerable populations received better protections. She had received death threats, faced legal intimidation, and weathered smear campaigns, but she never backed down from stories she believed needed to be told. On October 29, 2004, Tori was deep into an investigation that she had told colleagues would be career-defining. For weeks, she had been working late nights and weekends, following leads on what she described as a web of corruption that reaches into places people would never expect. Tori's cameraman and closest collaborator, Jake Morrison, was the last person to see her alive. Jake had dropped Tori off at her Beacon Hill apartment at 11:45 p.m. after a long day of filming interviews for her investigation. Tori was energized but also paranoid, Jake later told investigators. She kept checking her mirrors while we drove, said she thought someone had been following her car for the past few days. She had me come up to her apartment to check that it was secure before I left. That wasn't like her. Tori was fearless, but she was also careful. Security footage from Tori's apartment building showed her entering the lobby at 11:52 p.m., carrying her laptop bag and a large accordion folder filled with documents. She appeared alert and cautious, looking over her shoulder as she walked toward the elevator. The footage showed Tori taking the elevator to the 4th floor, where her apartment was located. She never left the building again. When Tori failed to show up for a scheduled 8 a.m. interview the following morning, her producer became concerned. Tori was famously punctual and never missed appointments without notification. When she didn't answer her phone or respond to pages, station personnel went to check on her. Detective Robert Hayes of the Boston Police Department was called to Tori's apartment at 2:30 p.m. on October 30th. What he found was a scene that suggested careful planning rather than random violence or spontaneous disappearance. Tori's apartment showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her purse and keys were on the kitchen counter, her bed was unmade as if she had never gone to sleep, and her laptop was open on her desk, but completely wiped of all data. Most telling, the accordion folder Jake had seen her carrying was missing, along with all of her research materials for the investigation she had been working on. The missing files became the focus of intense scrutiny. Tori's colleagues at Channel 7 confirmed that she had been extremely secretive about her current investigation, keeping all research materials at home rather than in her office, as was her usual practice. She had told only a few trusted people that she was working on something that would expose corruption at the highest levels. Thomas Bradford was among the first people investigators interviewed. As Tori's news director and the executive who had assigned her to the investigation, he seemed like the logical person to provide information about her recent work. Bradford seemed genuinely devastated, Detective Hayes recalled years later. He kept talking about what a brilliant journalist Tori was, how much she meant to the station and to the cause of investigative reporting. He appeared to be doing everything possible to help us understand what she had been working on. But Bradford claimed he had only limited knowledge of Tori's current investigation. He said she had requested permission to pursue a story involving corporate malfeasance in the healthcare industry, but had been vague about specific details. He insisted that Tori had been working independently and hadn't shared her findings with station management. The investigation expanded rapidly as news of Tori's disappearance spread through the journalism community. Fellow reporters, sources she had cultivated over the years, and advocacy groups she had worked with all provided information about her recent activities. What emerged was a picture of a journalist who had been following an extremely sensitive story involving connections between healthcare corporations, government regulators, and media companies. Several sources confirmed that Tori had been investigating what she believed was systematic suppression of stories that would have exposed dangerous medical devices and pharmaceutical products. The case began attracting national attention when Tori's disappearance was covered by major networks and journalism organizations. The Committee to Protect Journalists issued statements about the dangers faced by investigative reporters, and Columbia University's journalism school established a lecture series in her honor. But despite extensive searches, interviews with hundreds of people, and analysis of all available evidence, the case went cold within months. Tori's family hired private investigators and offered rewards for information. Channel 7 produced documentaries about her disappearance and continued advocating for answers. Thomas Bradford remained a consistent advocate for finding Tori throughout the ordeal. He spoke at journalism conferences about the importance of protecting investigative reporters, testified before congressional committees about media safety, and regularly appeared on other networks to discuss Tori's case and call for answers. FBI Special Agent Maria Rodriguez joined the Bureau's Cold Case Unit in 2020, 16 years after Tori's disappearance. Rodriguez specialized in cases involving violence against journalists and brought both advanced investigative techniques and deep understanding of media industry dynamics to unsolved cases. Rodriguez's review of the Victoria Blackwood case began in early 2024, focusing on digital evidence that might not have been properly analyzed using 2004-era technology. She was particularly interested in Tori's wiped laptop and the possibility that data might be recoverable using modern forensic techniques. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: backup files that had been automatically saved to a server at Channel 7 that investigators hadn't known existed in 2004. The server had been part of an early network backup system that saved copies of files accessed on station computers. Using advanced data recovery techniques, Rodriguez was able to extract fragments of documents that Tori had worked on in the weeks before her disappearance. What she found there would expose 21 years of lies and manipulation. The recovered files revealed that Tori had been investigating a sophisticated scheme involving pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, and media organizations. The scheme involved suppressing negative coverage of dangerous products while promoting positive stories about their safety and effectiveness. Most significantly, the files showed that Channel 7 itself was part of the conspiracy. Thomas Bradford had been receiving payments from pharmaceutical companies to kill stories about dangerous drugs and medical devices. He had used his position as news director to assign reporters to other stories when they got too close to exposing harmful products. But the most damning evidence came from email communications between Bradford and representatives of various corporations. Messages recovered from the server showed that Bradford had been systematically betraying his own journalists, providing advance warning to companies when reporters were investigating them. Blackwood is getting close to the Meridian story, Bradford had written in an email dated October 15, 2004. She has documents showing the device failures and has been interviewing victims' families. Need immediate guidance on neutralization strategy. The Meridian story referred to Tori's investigation of a cardiac device that had been causing fatal malfunctions but whose dangers were being covered up by both the manufacturer and regulatory agencies. The recovered files showed that Tori had documented dozens of deaths linked to the device and had been preparing to expose both the cover-up and the media's role in suppressing the story. Additional files revealed that Bradford had been receiving payments of over $50,000 per month from various healthcare companies in exchange for controlling news coverage. He had used his reputation for integrity to make the suppression of negative stories seem like legitimate editorial decisions rather than corporate censorship. Armed with this explosive evidence, FBI agents obtained warrants to search Bradford's current properties and financial records. What they found there confirmed 21 years of systematic corruption and provided the final pieces of a devastating puzzle. Hidden in Bradford's home office were detailed financial records showing payments from pharmaceutical companies dating back to the 1980s. The records revealed that he had received over $3 million over the decades in exchange for controlling news coverage of healthcare issues. More disturbing were personal files Bradford had kept on journalists who had threatened to expose dangerous products. The files contained detailed dossiers on reporters, including information about their personal lives, financial situations, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to control their reporting. But the most incriminating evidence was found in Bradford's private safe: audio recordings of conversations with Tori in the weeks before her disappearance. The recordings revealed that Bradford had been trying to convince Tori to abandon her investigation while secretly reporting her progress to the companies she was investigating. In the final recording, made just days before Tori vanished, she could be heard confronting Bradford directly about his corruption. "I know you've been taking money from these companies, Tom. I have the bank records, I have the communications, I have everything. You've been betraying everything journalism is supposed to stand for, and you've been doing it for years." Bradford's response was captured clearly. "You don't understand the complexity of running a news organization, Tori. Sometimes compromise is necessary for the greater good. If you expose this, you'll destroy not just me, but the entire station and everyone who works here." "The greater good?" Tori's voice was incredulous. "People are dying because you've been suppressing stories about dangerous medical devices. That's not compromise, that's complicity in murder." The conversation ended with Bradford making what could only be interpreted as a threat. "Be very careful, Tori. This isn't just about business relationships. There are people involved in this who don't respond well to exposure. If you pursue this story, you might find yourself in more danger than you realize." Confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Bradford initially maintained his innocence and claimed the recordings were fabricated. But as additional evidence mounted, including financial records and communications with criminal associates who specialized in corporate problem-solving, his story began to crumble. The confession came during Bradford's 7th interrogation session with Agent Rodriguez and federal prosecutors. After 21 years of living with his secret while publicly advocating for press freedom, Thomas Bradford finally revealed what had happened to Victoria Blackwood on October 30, 2004. According to Bradford's confession, he had arranged to meet Tori at her apartment under the pretense of providing her with additional information for her investigation. But when she presented him with evidence of his corruption and threatened to expose him in her upcoming report, he panicked. Bradford admitted to strangling Tori during their confrontation when she refused to abandon her investigation. He had then called criminal associates who specialized in disposing of evidence and bodies, people he had met through his corrupt relationships with corporate clients. Bradford confessed that Tori's body had been disposed of in a way that would ensure it was never found. He had spent the following days systematically destroying all evidence of her investigation and creating false narratives about her disappearance that would deflect suspicion from him and his corporate partners. The confession revealed the sophisticated cover-up that had allowed Bradford to avoid suspicion for 21 years. His position as news director had given him control over how Tori's disappearance was covered by Channel 7, allowing him to shape the narrative and suppress information that might have exposed his involvement. Most chilling was Bradford's revelation that Tori wasn't his first victim. He admitted to being involved in the intimidation and harassment of several other journalists over the years, and to having information about at least 2 other reporters whose deaths or disappearances had been made to appear accidental when they got too close to stories his corporate partners wanted suppressed. The arrest of Thomas Bradford sent shockwaves through the journalism world that reverberated from Boston to newsrooms across the country. For 21 years, the journalism community had mourned Victoria Blackwood as a courageous reporter whose life had been cut short while pursuing truth and accountability. The revelation that she had been murdered by her own news director, a man who had built his reputation on supporting investigative journalism while secretly working to suppress it, shattered the journalism community's trust in their own institutions. Tori's family, her parents Robert and Susan Blackwood and her younger sister Jennifer, finally had answers to the questions that had tormented them for over 2 decades. But the truth brought devastating realization about how completely they had been deceived. Tom Bradford spoke at Tori's memorial service. Susan Blackwood said through tears at the press conference announcing Bradford's arrest. He talked about what a fearless journalist she was, how she died pursuing truth and justice. He promised us he would never stop looking for her killer, all while knowing he was the one who had taken her from us. The trial of Thomas Bradford began in February 2025 and lasted 9 months. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney David Chun, presented a methodical case built on audio recordings, financial records, and testimony from whistleblowers who had been intimidated into silence for decades. The defense team attempted to argue that the recordings were taken out of context and that Bradford was being framed by corporate enemies seeking to destroy his reputation. They portrayed him as a dedicated journalist who had devoted his life to quality news coverage. But the jury wasn't convinced by the defense arguments. The audio evidence was overwhelming, and testimony from multiple sources painted a clear picture of systematic corruption that had perverted the very mission of journalism. After deliberating for 30 hours over 5 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The evidence showed that Bradford had not only killed Tori, but had operated a criminal enterprise that had corrupted news coverage for decades. Judge Patricia Martinez sentenced Thomas Bradford to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive terms for the other crimes. At 67 years old, Bradford will spend the remainder of his life behind bars for crimes that had remained hidden for over 2 decades. During the sentencing hearing, several journalists who had been victimized by Bradford's schemes testified about the impact of his corruption on their careers and on public safety. Their testimony revealed how his actions had prevented important stories from being told, potentially costing lives. Sarah Kim, now a successful investigative reporter who had been intimidated out of pursuing a pharmaceutical story in the 1990s, addressed the court directly. Thomas Bradford didn't just murder Tori Blackwood. He murdered the public's right to know. He corrupted journalism at its core, turning news organizations into tools of corporate propaganda. Tori died because she refused to be part of that system. Her courage exposed not just one corrupt executive, but an entire network of people who were willing to let people die to protect corporate profits. Channel 7 was shut down permanently following Bradford's conviction, and its broadcast license was revoked. The station's parent company filed for bankruptcy after facing hundreds of lawsuits from families of people who had been harmed by products that Bradford had helped keep dangerous information from the public. Victoria Blackwood's legacy lives on through the Tori Blackwood Foundation for Press Integrity, established by her family to support independent investigative journalism and advocate for stronger protections for reporters investigating corporate malfeasance. Tori believed that journalism could save lives by holding powerful people accountable, Robert Blackwood said at the foundation's inaugural ceremony. She died proving that belief was correct, even though it cost her everything. Through this foundation, her commitment to truth and justice continues. The journalism industry has implemented significant changes in response to Tori's case, including better oversight of corporate relationships, stronger whistleblower protections for journalists, and more transparent disclosure of financial interests that might compromise news coverage. Dr. Margaret Walsh, a media ethics professor who has studied Tori's case extensively, explains its broader significance. The Victoria Blackwood case represents the ultimate betrayal of journalistic principles. When news directors become agents of the corporations they're supposed to investigate, journalism loses its essential function as a democratic watchdog. Tori's murder was the inevitable result of a system that prioritized profit over truth. Contemporary journalism schools have embraced Tori's story as both inspiration and cautionary tale. Her methods of investigation, her commitment to serving the public interest, and her refusal to compromise her principles have become the gold standard for investigative reporting education. As of today, September 23, 2025, Thomas Bradford remains in federal prison, where he is serving his life sentence. He has shown no remorse for his crimes and continues to maintain that he was protecting the journalism industry from economic collapse by maintaining corporate relationships. The case serves as a stark reminder that corruption can hide behind the most respected institutions, that the people we trust to inform us about danger may be the ones concealing it, and that the pursuit of truth in journalism can still be deadly for those who refuse to be silenced by corporate power. Victoria Blackwood was 29 years old when her life was stolen by someone who had positioned himself as her mentor and protector. Her dreams of using journalism to protect vulnerable people from corporate exploitation died with her in an apartment where she should have been safe, killed by a news director who had built his career on the very principles he was betraying. But her memory lives on as a catalyst for change in an industry that had lost its way, a reminder that genuine journalism requires independence from the very powers it seeks to investigate, and that authentic voices, like Tori's, can never be completely silenced, even by those who control the airwaves and printing presses. The television studios and newsrooms of America continue to produce journalism that serves the public interest, but Tori's story serves as a permanent reminder that corporate influence on news coverage can be deadly, and that the most dangerous threats to press freedom often come from within the very institutions that claim to champion it.